It's like nothing we've ever seen. It's AI on steroids by a
Mm,
million. Do you
mm,
know what I mean? And the effect it can have on certain industries in the pharmaceutical space, even in the financial space,
mm.
anything that like works on bigger and bigger models, it could really upend so much of the kind of the infrastructure we know to be a fact now. Emmett, how are we getting on?
Hey, Mike, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm loving the specs. I think this is a debut for the podcast, is it?
Somebody warned me that as soon as you turn 50, lots of parts of you kind of deteriorate in performance. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And I was playing a tennis match when someone said this to me because they had glasses on, sports glass. And I was like, I don't think I'll ever need those. And I swear to God, within a week of turning 50, I had to go get my eyes checked. And yeah, anyway, this is the net result.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very appropriate. The look as a whole for what we're discussing today, because my brain is melting out my ears from the more I read up on this subject, the more confused I get. And it
Yeah.
really. What's your quote about good technology is like it's tough to discern from magic, or what is it?
Yeah, it
Is
was
that
Arthur
Asimov?
C. Clarke
Arthur
who
C.
in
Clarke.
1974, yeah, he said that suitably advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah.
And it is, no, you're right. Today's subject is indistinguishable from magic. I totally agree.
100%. Okay, so we're talking about quantum computing.
Hmm.
I'm surprised we haven't talked about this already because we like to do kind of big concept ideas. We've done a bunch on autonomous driving, we've done a bunch on AI, we've done a bunch on CRISPR, and
Yeah.
this seems like a step above. Is
Yeah.
that a fair statement to say? This really seems like less science and more sci-fi.
Yeah, I certainly think so. I think AI is something that most people can kind of get their heads around as a logical evolution of all of the data on the internet being tied together, resulting in an end product that makes more sense to human beings and processes and the likes. I think CRISPR is very much out there. It is indistinguishable from magic, really, when you consider the fact that there's a technology that promises to cure anything in any human living organism. But you're right, the whole quantum computing thing, I think, is up there with CRISPR. Uh,
Oh, I'd
and
say
I thought,
beyond.
would you? Yeah.
But this we're going to get into all of it, but this concept of superposition and entanglement and all of this kind of that's sci-fi to me. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, but we I don't think we can go that deep in it. I think
No.
this show should be somewhat concerned with at least getting everybody level set because this technology is going to be everywhere. And
Yeah.
it's the earliest days. And I'm quite sure most of our listeners or all of our listeners have heard about quantum computing. And I think it would be useful to at least introduce the subject, explain why it's going to be so big and what in fact it's going to change.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to let you do that. You have the physics degree, and if I tried to do it, I think
Well,
I'd go. I think I'd go cross-eyed.
well, I suppose then picking up where I left off, I mean, it appears that quantum computing won't really change everything, but it's probably going to change the things that change everything. Which, if
Yes.
you
Okay.
to talk about getting your head into a quantum state, so it's unlikely to impact your daily life directly. Like we're not going to have a quantum version of TikTok. We're
No,
just going to,
or a quantum
yeah,
phone. I don't think will ever
no,
be a realistic concept.
No, no, it's real paralyzing in solving very deeply complex problems, very specific problems that normal computers just can't handle efficiently, which is something we're not used to. I think your average person's computer and phone can deal with anything they need in a split second. But when you go to higher orders of complexity, these computers, the ones we interact with every day, just can't cut it. So, like in fields like pharmaceutical, and material science and climate modeling, there are problems that none of us concern ourselves with from day to day. They're out there. We know there's some scientists thinking about them, but the tools that these scientists have are inadequate to get to the endpoint, the answer that's required. And quantum computing will enable breakthroughs by, for example, simulating molecules and chemical reactions at an atomic level. So, like, there's so many industries that are awaiting quantum's arrival, like in cybersecurity, for example. It's going to pose a whole new set of barriers, but
Mm.
it's also going to pose a whole new set of threats. So potentially breaking current encryption systems is pretty much beyond most computing power. Whereas if we were to bring the computers of 10 years from now into today, they would smash through the firewalls that we have set up around our systems. So the really, like, quantum is driving the development of next gen security protocols. And then other industries like logistics and finance, all things to do with optimization around computing businesses. Quantum will accelerate problem solving in ways that transform entire industries.
Yeah, it's
However,
almost like the bigger the model, the
yeah,
more appropriate for quantum, if that's a fair thing to say. So like you're
it's a very
talking about
fair.
major simulations.
Yeah,
And I don't know if this is like kind of fathomable, but if you think of any issues that our current computing power is inefficient for, or doesn't have the power, we'll say.
yeah.
So like these major pharmaceutical I'm trying to think of the Monte Carlo simulations where they
Yes,
run through
exactly.
millions and billions of possible outcomes.
Yeah.
Anything that would come along those lines would really be applicable for quantum, where it's that level of application.
No, I'm impressed actually that you're aware of the Monte Carlo simulation, because I used to use the Monte Carlo tool when way back in the start of my career when I was a radio engineer. We used to run Monte Carlo simulations on propagation of radio waves and all the different outcomes that could occur. And even then, it was quite advanced, but now it feels like 101. And you're absolutely right. Like the hype around quantum AI today around everyday stuff is completely misplaced. Like apps and websites and machine learning won't benefit from quantum horsepower, but or at least it won't for quite a while. But the thing is, quantum will change key sectors, and the ripple effects that come out of those specific industries and sectors absolutely will improve our lives downstream. So I think it's worthwhile telling people what it is before we discuss how to invest in it, because really that's where our conversation needs to be aligned. And I was
Okay.
talking at
Good luck.
oh, thanks. Well, I was speaking at this Trinity College Dublin, Trinity managed student managed fund, a wonderful set of students, undergrads who are managing a fund in Trinity College. It was set up something like 30 years ago, and they've done a remarkably good job at managing the fund for a kind of an everlasting fund that generally I think finance undergrads are managing. And I was asked from the audience, talk to me about quantum. And, it felt like my trousers fell down because I really was at odds. I couldn't go there. So I had to go off and study it a little more I had a hand waving understanding, but when you're standing in front of 100 odd intellectuals, you're not going to kind of riff your way through quantum computing. So I did have to go off and figure out what it was before, as I said, figuring out how to invest in it. Because at the very least, folks, you're going to hear more and more and more about quantum computing in the years ahead. And this might be the very first time that you've considered and concerned yourself with, well, what is it? Okay, hold tight. Well, I'm going to kind of bring you up to the kind of a quick journey through computing and I suppose quantum mechanics. So back in the early 20th century, physicists like Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein were kind of grappling with the idea that at the tiniest scales, inside atoms and particles, like if you go zoom in, like a movie, right inside the heart of an atom, the universe does not behave in the predictable way that we're used to. So here at human level, things behave in a certain way. If you take a mug and put it down on the table, your brain knows how it will react, how it will feel when it hits that table. And if you walk out of the room, assuming no one or nothing else interferes with that mug, when you come back in, it will be where you left it. But when you zoom right in to the center of an atom, it doesn't behave like that. And a few movies kind of tried to touch on all things quantum mechanics, I think Interstellar went through string theories that are
Did it? I don't know. It's
Matthew
not. I'm
McConaughey.
not. I don't think anyone listened to this podcast will have Interstellar spoiled on them at this stage, but like the secret ingredient was love kind of BS at the end is like, I don't think that's a science reference anymore.
Yeah. Oh, the secret ingredient was love. You sound like Katy Perry after getting off the. But anyway, look. Instead of things just being as they are, which is the way our brains assimilate everything we interact with from the moment we're born, with quantum mechanics, things can be in multiple states at once, which is also known as superposition. And particles can be connected across vast distances, which is a phenomenon known as entanglement. And outcomes are more governed by probabilities rather than certainties. Like, so that whole kind of, I put my mug down and I walk out of the room and I walk back in a quantum mechanics world, it might or might not be somewhere or anywhere in that room, which most
Yeah.
people go, I don't even know what you're on about.
Well, I
Yeah.
think that you're probably going to get into this, but like the Schrodinger's cat example
Yes. Yeah.
is the way of thinking about superposition.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the
It
cat is
is.
both dead and not dead at the same time until you find out.
True. And it was a horrible effort at explaining it, in my opinion. I remember studying it in college, Schrodinger's cat, but it was as good as anything because, look, in fairness to Schrodinger, he managed to come up with a device for most people to at least listen to and nod slowly in the hope you'll stop talking. Oh, right. So the cat might or mightn't be alive. You know, so he brought the concept to the masses with Schrodinger's cat. And there's so many different ways you could go about explaining it. But as you said, it's the concept that when you put a cat in a box, if you're so cruel to do so, the cat is both alive and dead simultaneously. And anyway, rather me dive down Schrodinger's explanation, I'll walk down this kind of path. So back then at the time, you know, there was mostly mystery. This kind of quantum state was only a mystery for physicists to kind of think about. But in the 1980s, way after Bohr and Albert Einstein died, a few scientists began to wonder, what if we could use these weird quantum properties that allegedly exist to do something useful like compute? And classical computers, as everybody knows, are built with lots of ones and zeros. Everything is in one state or the other, like a light switch on a wall, not a dimmer
Yeah.
switch, but it's either on or off. And inside of a computer, you've tens of billions or trillions of those light switches, which collectively create what it is we're used to. But what if you could build a machine based on quantum bits or qubits, which can either be a 0 or a 1 at the exact same time, which is
Yes.
that kind of, this is where our brains fail to.
This is the sci-fi bit for me. Yeah.
This is the sci-fi bit. This is the part where the fact that we've lived our lives the way we've lived them and observed our everything in our existence in a certain way, it does not reconcile with what your brain says is normal. So at a quantum level, things can be both at the same time. It's two different things at once.
It's almost it's hard science while also being conceptual. If that
Yeah.
makes sense. So like we're
Yes.
used to a binary system, and that's like the foundation of computing power in general, is like every bit. So, you know, if you have a gigabyte of data, that's a million bits or whatever else. And every single one of them are either 0 or 1.
Yeah.
That's how they essentially communicate with each other.
Yeah,
Where now
that's
you're
right.
introducing this new thing, and we're going to get into worse stuff again in terms of trying to wrap your head around it. But
Yeah.
in a sense, these qubits can be either 0 or 1 at the same time.
Exactly.
And they're able to communicate along that. They're able to communicate under that guise of being either or.
Correct. And when it's funny when you say it's what the expression used was, it's a not a theoretical model, it's a, what was it you said? It was kind of like a way of thinking about things. Well, it's a way of wrapping your head around something that is real. So it's kind of like, just because something has never been seen or observed by you doesn't mean it can't exist. And that's really, I think quantum is a very good example of that. Like, the idea of a quantum computer didn't come from computer engineers, but it came from theoretical physicists, which is something I need to tell my wife, because she's an engineer by original profession. And whenever she fixes something in the home that I didn't fix, she says, that's the difference between a physicist and an engineer. We're very practical. Well, no, sorry, not 1-0 to the physicists. We came up with quantum computers. Engineers didn't. So I kind of have to raise that example.
Pat yourself on the back there, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Here's 1-0 to all our physics nerds. But one of the first people who articulated the concept of quantum and quantum computing was a name who most people might recognize, a guy called Richard Feynman, who's a Nobel-winning American physicist. And his books were all the rage when I was in college, string theory and the likes. And in 1981, he gave what is now a very famous talk where he argued that simulating quantum systems like molecules and particles was incredibly hard for classical computers, never mind the human brain. But what if we built a computer that itself ran on quantum mechanics? What he failed to do was to get Katy Perry to explain it to the masses. But she wasn't around. But not long after that, a guy called David Deutsch at Oxford formalized the idea of a universal quantum computer, which is a theoretical machine that could, in principle, perform any calculation that a classic computer could calculate, which you would hope, plus a whole ton more. And Deutsch wasn't building anything physical yet, but he was laying the groundwork for the mathematical foundations of quantum computing. And it was still very much early days. And for a while, quantum was really just a thought experiment. It was, well, if we could do this, we could do that. And it was predicated on a lot of suppositions. But it was the stuff of long nights. And, it was then really the stuff of friends drinking whiskey and laughing at physics and all its oddities. There were no barriers to what you could imagine and think about because there were no machines, just equations and models and big dreams, really. So quantum was not a real thing until very, very recently. It started to heat up in 1990s when researchers started discovering that quantum computers could solve real problems faster. And in 1994, a guy called Peter Shor developed an algorithm that could, break widely used encryption methods in a fraction of a time that a classic computer would need. And this was a bombshell in both the computing and cyber security worlds. It meant quantum computers could one day pose a very serious threat to online security, which I suppose is reference to the point I was saying that if we could have computers 10 years hence today, we would all be in a whole load of trouble if they were in the wrong hands. So around the same time, a guy called Lov Grosvenor invented an algorithm for searching databases way faster using quantum principles. And when you look at vast, giant databases, most people search a database and the database is of such size that it doesn't take long. But when you take a vast database of information, like everybody's human DNA, to search that would take forever or close to it. So quantum computing allows far faster endpoints. And these breakthroughs turned quantum computing from a kind of fringe idea with like some super intelligent thinkers into something with very real world implications. And yet the problem of still there's no hardware existed. So everyone was edging forward in the what ifs, what coulds, and the written algorithms, but the actual machine to do it wasn't there yet. And that's, you can see, our listeners can hear what we're edging towards. So creating a working quantum computer turned out to be, as you can imagine, the most enormous challenge. Like you really needed some very specialist people working in collaboration. And qubits, the actual, I suppose, the petrol or the gasoline of the entire system, are incredibly fragile. They can fall apart, or as they know, as it's called in physics, they can decohere instantly when disturbed by the slightest vibration or temperature change or electromagnetic waves. So like you can't keep them in a box near your washing machine. These are very small, fragile things. So keeping a qubit stable long enough to do calculations has required ultra cold temperatures, vacuum chambers, and most incredibly precise engineering, like mind-boggling precise engineering to unlock the power of quantum computing. So throughout the 2000s, there was a whole bunch of small academic labs And a couple of bigger research teams, all the usual ones like IBM and MIT, they started to build early prototypes of quantum computing. And the machines could only handle a couple of qubits for the reasons I explained. But they were proof that quantum computing wasn't just a thought experiment and it wasn't just science fiction, that you could build a computer that could assimilate two states that are at odds with each other at the same time. And one of the early commercial pioneers was a company called D-Wave Systems, and it was a Canadian company that claimed to build a quantum computer in 2011. And there was debate over whether D-Wave's machine was really a quantum computer, but it did help generate interest and funding in the field, because as soon as something extraordinary, world-changing is built by any person or company or country, other people, businesses and countries take note and go, hold on, we don't want them to get the lead on this. So in the past decade, quantum computing has transformed from quite a slow-moving research project that began in the heads of Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr and possibly physicists before them who are less well known, into a high-stakes global race. And all the usual giants that we talk about are going for it, like Google and IBM and Intel and Microsoft. They've all poured billions, tens of billions into quantum research. So where are we now? Well, in 2019, albeit 6 years ago, God, I don't even know, my quantum brain has been around here.
Both can be right for this episode.
Yeah, I am in both years. So Google claimed, they claimed quantum supremacy. And the idea was that their quantum computer solved a problem faster than any classical computer could. And the task itself wasn't useful, or at least I don't know what it was. So that's just, I'm going to...
But there's a few of these overarching terms. Quantum supremacy is one, and then there's another one, quantum advantage, which people
Yes,
brought up
correct.
as well. And it's...
Yes,
there's multiple definitions, and there's no
there
like
are.
set one, but it's essentially quantum computer outperforming current computing power, or a quantum computer being able to outperform
Yeah.
computing power at a similar price. And there's a lot of these kind of highfalutin concepts a little bit.
There are, and there seems to be like a pyramid of what these terms mean. Like quantum supremacy comes before quantum advantage. Quantum advantage is a more powerful state than quantum supremacy, and I'd have to get the nerd book out to figure which is which. Quantum advantage, I think, is the application of quantum supremacy to show end results that matter to humanity, as opposed to things that are just nice little experiments for physicists to keep off the streets with. So anyway, there are startups in the space, and here we are we're in late spring, early summer 2025, and it feels like we're at the birth of an industry. And there's startups like Rigetti, IonQ or Ionic, spelled IonQ, Bionic, and then PsiQuantum have all kind of emerged, and they're offering these cloud accessible quantum machines and attracting interest from all over the place. And as I said, governments have jumped into the United States, China, and EU are all going for it full time and big time, I should say. And the EU has launched multi-billion-dollar quantum initiatives because they want to spark more engineers and physicists and developers into the space. Because truly, when this computing field has been cracked, there are a lot of humanity and Earth's problems are going to be solved that heretofore were just seen as unsolvable. So as of now, quantum computers are really still experimental. And in our world of where should you invest to be exposed to quantum, we'll go there. But quantum computers are real, and they're improving every year, but they're not powerful or stable enough to outperform classical computers at the moment. And but the progress can actually be observed, if you pardon the pun. And machines with just about 100 qubits exist today, and engineers are working hard to solve problems like error correction and scalability, and a bit like maybe talking about like Intel's 386 processor back in the late 80s or 90s, and then they had the 486, and then they brought out the Pentium. It feels to me, like when we talk about 100 qubits today, while it is the state of the state of the state of the art, and it is the edge of the edge on scientific and engineering advancement, it feels like we're talking about the Pentium 386 processor, when in fact it is, what's really important, it is just the very, 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 very beginnings of a whole new S-curve in uptake and advancements. And experts believe we're in this pre-industrial phase of quantum computing, which is comparable to, I suppose, even if we go minus a bit from the the Pentium processor, it feels like computing in the 1940s or the 1950s, and it's probably going to take another 5 to 15 to even 20 years before quantum computers are actually solving really commercially valuable problems reliably. But the foundations are there now. The science is there now. The engineering is there now. It has begun. So I hope all of our listeners live to see the day where quantum computing has vastly improved their lives. Because it isn't about making things faster. It's about doing things that just are impossible today. So, like, I think a logical thinker will go, okay, so quantum will solve this issue way quicker. Why don't we just get a whole stack of a whole data farm, get the whole of AWS and Amazon, AWS and Meta's data farms, and plug them in together and do? Can't be done. So there are actually complexities to the challenges that make classical computers random as good as useless. So really, all of this is to reflect the profound truth that physicists are better than engineers, and that's that. And engineers should make the tea for physicists.
That was that was
It's
a
the most.
long segue into a very a niche
Um,
tangent there, but I'll take it.
that's right. So really, Mike, I think what remains for us to at least have a shot at is talk about, where should we invest? If somebody is so inclined to get involved so early, and you know me, I love investing early. I always believe way too early requires Zen patience, but it's better than way too late. I love getting in early. I've invested in CRISPR, and I'm kind of carrying this awareness that nothing might come of it for another 8 to 10 years. But even I feel quantum's a little bit early, too early. So where should we go if we're still so inclined to get in before this wave of life-changing events or life-changing technology hits us all?
Yeah, I completely agree with the too early sentiment. Like, we've talked at length about big highfalutin concepts on this show,
Mm,
and it's fun to do. And these are the technology that will define the future. And I guess as stock pickers, I suppose it's your job to identify
yeah,
the technologies, but also identify a way of investing in them
yeah,
too.
yeah, exactly.
It's not just an easy win to say quantum computing is going to be a big thing in 10, 15, 20 years. So I'm going to invest in the companies you mentioned, the actual pure plays in the space. So there's Ionic, however you want
Yeah,
to pronounce it,
ionic. Yeah,
IONQ,
yeah.
Rigetti Computing, D-Wave Quantum Computing Inc. These pure plays have got a lot of attention, especially at the end of last year.
Oh yeah.
So I think they are all like up 7, 8 fold in the space of a
Hmm.
couple of months, and then
Oh,
since
it's
the start of
unbelievable.
2025, have been cut in half or worse. And these businesses are all like, they're not pre-revenue, but they're pretty much close to it, carrying $1 billion plus valuations. IonQ is a $6 billion company. I think it took in 40 million euro,
Mm,
$40 million in revenue last year. And so, especially given the bearish environment we're in right now, where these type of companies, they're at the highest end of the risk spectrum, and on a near-term basis, amid all the political uncertainty, the lack of investor confidence, the tariff tantrums, and basically just the geopolitical state of the world, in which no one really knows what's going to happen next, and that's a whole separate podcast. But it's in this kind of state of limbo, I suppose, which is appropriate for this
mm,
episode, where we talk about essentially limbo for a lot of it. These are the stocks that have the most room to fall. Do you
mm,
know what I mean? If you are
mm,
talking about a company, however big the potential, that's making 40 million a year and has a $6 billion valuation, that's going to be the first one to get cut. And
mm-hmm,
so, based on those astronomical valuations, on very little revenue, obviously no profits, I would just, for now at least, avoid the pure plays.
mm,
Um,
mm. Yeah.
and those are the ones we mentioned. I just think that in terms of exposure, in terms of the timelines,
Yeah.
like Jensen Huang of NVIDIA, he said that for commercial viability, it could be 15 to 30 years for quantum computing.
Did he?
And
Yeah.
and obviously, because of this such a speculative industry, all of those stocks got cut in half in like one day
Mm.
because of one person's comments. And that's
Yeah.
kind of how it's going to go. So if you are very interested in this industry or this market and this future technology, you can take big punts on these stocks, or you can start very small positions in Rigetti, D-Wave, Ionic, Quantum Computing Inc., and have that as just almost your watch list. But
Yeah.
there are also like, it's probably a boring way of doing it, but there are companies, legitimate companies, that are probably the most advanced in terms of quantum computing that you can invest in now at a great price.
Mm.
And unfortunately, it's the ones we always talk about anyways. It's
Yeah.
Google, it's Microsoft, it's Amazon, but they have been doing probably the most exciting things. So a lot of the quantum hype was kicked off by Google when it announced its Willow chip. And so what this Willow chip was able to do, when we're talking about not outperforming classic computers, but doing things that they can't do. And so Willow performed a calculation in 5 minutes, which would have taken one of the world's fastest supercomputers 10 septillion years to complete. And now, Emmet, we've had a running joke on this podcast about who can name the biggest number. I don't think 10 septillion is going to be beaten anytime soon.
No, no, that's quite the wait.
Yeah. And so Google essentially said the breakthrough came from grouping large numbers of qubits into so-called logical qubits. And this not so much improved the power, but improved stability. And we talked about stability so much. It's kind of the Achilles heel of quantum computing, in a sense, is the vast amount of work it has to do to make these qubits work logically. And this stability is where kind of all the business potential lies, because no one's questioned the power potential of quantum computers. It's always if we can make it work and if it can be commercially viable. And Google believes it's found a way to make them reliable in a way which didn't exist before. And
Yeah.
then it's not surprising that we're going through Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, because they're also the three largest cloud computing providers as well. And they're three of the most advanced companies in AI.
Yeah.
Which begs another question, which we've seen kind of play out with AI already. And it comes down to like the scale and breadth of our market leaders. So Google, Microsoft, Amazon, because of how well resourced they are and the incredible scale and just the extent of their operations, any new technology isn't really going to creep up on them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're tougher and tougher to be disrupted,
They
because
really are.
they're the ones that are actually pushing the new technology, and they're the ones that have the biggest safety net and the biggest, cash pool to do it. So quantum, I don't know, it's so early on in quantum. But it right now seems to be no different. It seems to be following a similar path to AI, where yes, there are going to be smaller disruptors and they're going to be kind of pure plays like, say, an OpenAI, which is incredible what it's done in the space of a couple of years. And maybe IonQ or who else could do something similar. Rigetti.
Yeah.
But maybe the power still lies in Google, Microsoft, and Amazon as well. And I'm going to talk about Microsoft in particular, because we were talking about sci-fi and wrapping your head around kind of new concepts. And what Microsoft has done, according to them anyways, seems straight out of a Ridley Scott movie, essentially. So in February, it announced its breakthrough that they went a different route to Google. Their quantum chip is called Majorana 1. And I'm just going to read this out because I don't even understand it myself. So it utilizes particles known as Majorana fermions to create a new state of matter known as a topological state. Essentially, it's a fourth state of matter distinct from solid, liquids, and gases. And so this is just Microsoft, that I'd say half the people listening to the podcast owns, are creating a new form of matter around this quantum computing hype.
Yeah.
So they believe the method scales more easily than competing techniques. It's going to be the best strategy to address stability issues, and it's a clearer direction to building large-scale functional systems in the future. The lead project researcher from Microsoft, he said that the development has shifted the timeline from utility scale quantum computers from decades to just a few years in the future. So
Oh my goodness.
that's is
Yeah, it's mind
seriously
boggling.
out there stuff. Like, as in
It's out there.
Microsoft is going
Yeah.
creating a new state of matter for this. And that's why at the start of the show I was like, I think I'm more confused the more research I've done with this, because my brain is literally like leaking out of my ears trying to think of what that actually means. And to be honest, I don't know. I think we're at the stage where it's too embryonic to
Yeah.
legitimately invest.
Yeah.
But you can invest in, and sorry, Amazon as well. I'm kind of leaving them out here, but they have developed a new chip a week after Microsoft did, which I don't think is surprising. I'd say they probably
Sure.
just wanted to make the announcement because
Of
Google and
course.
Microsoft did it before them.
Yeah.
So they have developed a chip called Ocelot, which will improve stability, reduce errors, and be able to work on much smaller systems, which would make it more commercially viable than the other two. So in my eyes, I believe quantum is not investable as a pure play yet.
Mhm.
There are stocks there that are outlets for that for people, but you can kind of invest in some of the highest quality businesses on the market in Microsoft and Google and Amazon, who may be the most advanced so far as well, but probably have the best chance to last until commercial viability. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Oh,
like,
entirely. Entirely.
if
Yeah,
that
you're
doesn't
right.
come in 10 or 15 years,
Mm.
does Rigetti or D-Wave or IonQ have the ability to last that long? And that's a big question.
Yeah, and that you're absolutely right. If you're looking at the companies right now, you would say no. And Google, for example, just keeps handing us reasons to own a few for the rest of our lives because they have something going on. They have so many things going on. We don't even know. We haven't even a clue what's going on in Google Labs. And this is just one of very, very, very many examples of a technology that until you dive in, you never fully appreciated that they are there and that they are on the leading edge of this, and that someday it mightn't just be an advertising business. But we definitely, you're right. If you want exposure to quantum, I think the way to play it is through one of the giants. Like you speaking of the others, the smaller ones, that is the constant thing when I was researching the ones that are out there. The can they survive until they're properly commercially applicable? And certainly the answer now, and with a very light level of research, would be, well, not unless they're bought out by a big parent who basically loves their technology. Like Rigetti, they went onto the market in 2022 with a SPAC. So they needed to do a cash grab. They wanted to I presume, wanted to sidestep the IPO process. Their ticker now today is RGTI. And when you look at how are they claiming to be different? They're saying they're building these quantum processors using superconducting circuits, which is very similar to what IBM and Google are doing. And they have this hybrid quantum classic computing platform up in the cloud, and it allows people and businesses to run quantum algorithms. But it definitely is a business facing quite a lot of operational challenges. It's had delays on its roadmap and bringing the products it's promised to market. And again, when you go deeper and deeper into the business, you realize it is going to be a long and hard road to conquer, if you like, or to walk. And like everything else, just to talk about their stock price. So every SPAC more or less went to market at $10 a share, which kind of makes their subsequent performance easy to take a very quick quantum glance at. So their shares just fell off a cliff for years. And then, as you said, was it kind of at the start of this year, there was this hot trend to get back in quantum, and they went up to about $20 a share, which was around their all-time high. But all that is fine. It doesn't matter because the business itself, just I personally wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. The other one we talked about, Ionic or IonQ, I must listen to one of their TED lectures to see how they refer to themselves. I presume it's Ionic. And their technology is using trapped ion qubits. And they also went to market via SPAC in 2021. And their ticker, no surprises, IONQ. And they're using these trapped ions that are being manipulated with lasers, which are known for having a better coherence, a longer coherence time, and higher gateway fidelities. Actually, let's not go too too geeky, but
Yeah, yeah.
they have a nice toolbox there for people. But effectively, what it means is through your major cloud platforms, AWS or Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud, you can gain access to their tech, and they've actually really gathered an awful lot of attention in the fact that they are further along in the commercialization
Yeah.
of their tech.
They
Like,
seem
yeah.
of any of the pure plays to be the most advanced for sure.
Oh, there's no question. So
And the
they
valuation reflects that as well, I think.
evaluation reflects it. It's a bit crackers. Now their revenue, if you just looked at the compounded annual growth of their revenue, you would think, wow, it's a good thing, because effectively in 2019 they didn't make a penny. In 2021, not in skipping 2020, they made nothing. 2021 they did about 2 million in revenue. Then 2022, 11 million. 2023, 22 million. And then by the end of last year, they've done about 43 million in revenue. So effectively, they've
Yeah.
doubled revenue every year
Which
for the last few
which
years.
is
But
which
that's
is fine for a little startup, not a
oh yeah,
public
yeah, yeah.
company with the $6 billion valuation.
This is true. So the 6 billion valuation shows that the world is looking to get in early. Although that the early ship is pretty, you got to argue is sales when you're at 6 billion. But they're trying to get in early, and what is hopefully for the investor analogous to getting into Microsoft in the early 80s, or whenever it was that Microsoft floated on stock exchange. So it's like, well, this is going to be big. These guys have a head of steam. They have a unique defensible technology that's super highly complex and has already begun to sell. So you can see why investors are going there. And I wouldn't guffaw or laugh at an investor. I could talk myself into just putting a small amount of money into it and leaving it, because it only takes a small investment in something that grows 100 or 1,000 fold to meaningfully change your personal situation. So they might be the one that manages to figure their commercialization strategy, and or rather capitalization strategy, over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, yeah.
PsiQuantum, which is the other one I mentioned, like they're private. They've had $700 million invested in them, and they're kind of building out these fault tolerant, like million qubit quantum machines. So they're behind the veil of a private company. So we can't even think about investing in them yet. You know what? There's probably an ETF or some kind of fund that's gone pure quantum. I should have looked at that before the show.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but it would just be dominated by big tech. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Well, that's true. That is true. That's the way these things go. Oh,
yeah.
Mike, important thing. I have to plug Horizon.
100%. Go on.
Yeah. Well, sorry, I just reminded myself, but thinking about quantum, that just sparked my memory. So after I launched Horizon, there was a company that I was particularly enamored with, but its shares started to fire up, and the shares of this business grew fivefold in the following years. Well, they've fallen right back to earth near the starting price, and I'm going to pitch that stock this coming Thursday in Horizon, only in Horizon, folks. I'm probably going to invest in the business. I haven't fully committed to it yet, but I do think that one of the greatest industry defining companies of our time has just been absolutely pummeled in recent weeks and months post tariff changes, and hasn't recovered and will recover. So tune into Horizon this Thursday, only on Horizon, folks. You heard it first here on Stock Club, only on Horizon.
Okay. Have we covered everything? We obviously haven't covered everything about
Well, we
quantum.
covered
Everything
all
we're
things.
capable of.
Well, yeah, honestly, we've gone so far beyond our capabilities, Mike. It's unreal. I hope people appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's a fun episode and it's a fun concept. In terms of investability, I think it's way too early.
Mhm.
I think the public companies out there now are way too immature, way overvalued, but the technology itself and what it can do and its potential is, it's like nothing we've ever seen. It's AI on steroids by a
Mhm.
million. Do you
Mhm.
know what I mean? And the effect it can have on certain industries in the pharmaceutical space, even in the financial space,
Mhm.
anything that like works on bigger and bigger models, it could really upend so much of the kind of the infrastructure we know to be a fact now. That could
Mhm.
be turned on its head eventually.
Mm,
But will it happen in the next 10 years? No, I don't think so. I think it is way out.
mm, mm. Yeah, amen, brother. It's one of those things we have to wait. As I said at the top, it's going to not change things directly, probably going to indirectly change things, or will change the things we interact with, but not necessarily how we interact with them. I mean, as you said, I'm wearing glasses now, and my hair has decided to take a hike, and I'm more in favor of CRISPR making life better. So,
Okay. On
so there you
that note, I think a perfect way to end the episode. Emmet,
go.
thank you very much for joining me, and thank you everyone for listening. We'll talk to you next week. I think we might try to do a bit more down to earth
Oh
down to
yeah, yeah.
earth episode next week. Emmet, what do you
Sherwin
think?
Williams. Sherwin, we have got to talk about paint.
Okay, sounds good. We'll talk to you next week. We will talk to you next week. Thanks for everyone for joining.